Church, it is one of the most basic longings and desires that we have as human beings. Without it, we would die. And yet with it, we find ourselves sometimes preoccupied, sometimes overwhelmed, sometimes even taken over by it. It is our need for food. You thought I was talking about something else, didn't you? Our need for food, sisters and brothers. Without it, we would die. Without that craving and longing within us that tells our brain that our body needs nutrients, our body needs sustenance, we would cease to live. It is probably one of the very first instincts that a child has and knows instinctively that she needs to let somebody know when they are hungry. And you know, those who are moms here, those who raise children, you know the cry of a hungry baby. You know the cry that is different from a cry of pain or a cry for attention or even a cry that needs to be changed. But the cry of hunger is one that touches something deep within us because it's a cry and it's a longing that we all have. Whether we are an infant in arms or whether we find ourselves older and a little bit more sophisticated, we may not cry when we're hungry, but we certainly let others know that we're hungry. You know, when we don't eat, when we don't take care of ourselves, we begin to get a little irritable. You know, when our bellies are not happy, there is a discontent that takes over our lives. And everything just begins to bother us a little bit more. And then when it's not the stomach growling that reminds us that we need to eat, very often our body will send other signals. Because if we didn't pay attention to that one, we're certainly going to start to pay attention to that headache. We're going to pay attention to that lightheadedness that we feel that eventually is going to put our body on the floor until we eat something. Food, our need to eat, is essential to who we are. I think Jesus knew something about that. Because almost every time that Jesus encounters the disciples, after he says, "Do not be afraid, peace be with you," then he goes on to say, "Do you have anything to eat?" Even Jesus got hungry. Even Jesus had to deal with that need in his own life. And it is in the context of food that Jesus so often does his greatest work. His first miracle happens at the wedding feast of Cana. Oh, there was plenty of food, but not enough wine. And you can't have food without drink. Jesus knew that it was in that context of a meal that a sacramental life and love was beginning. Whenever Jesus encountered the disciples, whenever Jesus raised someone from sickness, he says, get something for them to eat. Take care of their bodily need for nourishment. So too as Jesus gathers the disciples at the Last Supper, Jesus has some terrible and incredible things to tell them. And he knew, in order for them to handle this tough news, this challenging news, he needed to make sure their bellies were full. And it is only after the meal, at the end of the meal, where Jesus takes the ceremonial cup and the ceremonial bread and says, "Take and eat and drink. This is my body and blood, because after tonight I am no longer going to be with you." Their full bellies allowed them to at least begin to get a sense that something was changing, something was happening in their midst. When Jesus arises from the dead and appears to them on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, there is Jesus by the charcoal fire, waiting for their catch of fish to be prepared so that they could eat breakfast. And today, once again, we hear Jesus preaching to the crowds. And as they're preaching, the disciples themselves are getting hungry. Don't think that the disciples were concerned about the crowds. They're not that great yet. Remember, the disciples got a whole lot of mess going on. They don't even know what Jesus is about. They're not even sure what he's trying to say to them. And so when the disciples say, send these folks away to get something to eat because we can't handle it, what they were really saying is, tell them to go home because we're hungry. Tell them to go home because we're tired. Tell them to go home because we don't want to be bothered anymore today. And Jesus turns it around and says, feed them yourselves. Take care of them yourselves. Give them what they need yourselves. And what makes it so clear, I think, that the disciples' thinking is out of sorts is because then they turn to Jesus and they say, but we don't have enough food to give them. We can't feed all these people. How are we going to take care of this? And they miss the point once again. They're thinking in terms of material food. Jesus is talking about spiritual food. You see, they've already heard Jesus teach and preach. They've seen him work wonders in their midst. And still those disciples don't believe that they can give testimony to what they've seen and heard. They are afraid, and they fall back to Jesus and said, Jesus, you need to do something, because we can't. And Jesus says, no, you can, and you must, and you will. And then Jesus, it says, raises his eyes and hands to heaven. And I wonder if it was not only a prayer asking God to bless those 5 loaves and 2 fish, but I wonder if Jesus did not throw up his arms in exasperation and say, God, when are they going to get it? When will they understand?